Don't worry, people. I was just outside. These are transitionals. They will go back to clear, and you will be able to see my beautiful green eyes in black and white. I'm going to start this film with a line from Tombstone. I'm not going to fight you, Ringo. There's no money in it. I think that is a lesson we can all take to heart with this film called Let's Talk Business. All right, I don't know if you can see it or not, but over there, I am charging every conceivable device I have for an intended departure on Sunday for a long road trip. Whether or not this works, I have no idea. I might be back in 4 days, or I might be back in 6 weeks. I don't know. But got me thinking. Over the past week, I've been fortunate enough to run into a lot of really good photographers here in New Mexico, some from here, some traveling through here, and had some really interesting conversations about the business of photography. And it got me thinking. I hear a lot of odd things about the business of photography, and I hear some good things about the business of photography, but I think there's also a lot of confusion, and being in business as a photographer means different things to different people, and I think that there's a lot to learn. The overwhelming concept of today's film is really one of positivity. There is no one way to do business as a photographer. People want different things. They see themselves as the person they are and the person they want to be, and there's a lot of ways to get from A to B. One is not necessarily better than the other. Everybody has to sort of navigate their own path. A lot of the traditional paths that I had as a photographer coming up no longer exist. But on the flip side, there are all these new avenues and new paths and new outlets for work that I didn't have. So it's a trade-off. But I've made about 10 different points because that's what people do on YouTube to hold everyone's attention. I don't have any gels behind me, but what I do have is an assortment of work. And this is a little precautionary tale that I want to start this film with, which is, of all these images you see on the wall behind me, and this is just one room of my house, obviously, exactly one of the photographs is mine because it was in a show and didn't sell. I would never frame my own stuff and put it on the wall. And one is a painting that I did because I can't paint to save my life. And yet I pulled off a painting over here, this first one, that when I did it, I was like, that's really, I think it's actually good. And I have no recollection of doing it. I just stared at this small piece of watercolor paper with acrylic and I just did it. And then when it was done, I was like, did I do that? So yeah, accidentally good, it's on the wall. But the work in this house is from Gary Boas. It's from Julian Wasserman. It's from Sarah Terry. It is from, let's see, not Mona Kuhn. I'm thinking of Karen Kuhn. It is Aaron Siskin, Akoi Asoy, Gerd Ludwig, Michael Greco, Philip Vigil, Jeff Frost, Greg Gorman. These are all works of other people. If you're going to be a professional photographer, you have got to engage with the industry. And that means buying the work, whether it's book form or print form, buying the work of other photographers. If your entire life is right here and your entire circle is only you thinking about you, you will develop a reputation that no one will want to be around. You've got to buy, and collecting photography is a very smart thing. It's a good investment. And if you don't know how to do that, you reach out to a gallery owner that you respect in your area and you say, look, I want to start collecting, can you help me? And they will help you. It is their business to help people start collecting. If you're not engaging with the work of other people, you are a selfish jerk that eventually will get outed. Okay, let's move on now that we've got all the positive speed bumps out of the way. The first point I want to say is, and this is numero uno, and I mean this with all sincerity, why on earth would you want to become a professional photographer now? Why on earth? It is not a great time to do this. It is a very, very challenging time. Photography is considered a mature industry. It was actually a mature industry in the 1980s. What revived photography in the 1980s, late 80s, was the beginnings of the advent of digital photography. It created a buzz around the industry that hadn't been around for quite some time. By the mid-90s, that buzz was a quiet roar, and by the late 90s, it was like deafening Niagara Falls waterfall, which is what spiked not only the professional photography industry, but the general population's excitement towards photography was blossomed by the advent of digital, putting a camera in anyone's hands. Nothing like this had happened since the invention of the Kodak Brownie camera. It's a challenging road. It's far more challenging, I think, than most people feel or even understand, because the outlets are shrinking. The value of photography in most cases is down. It's been commoditized, homogenized, lobotomized, however you want to call it. So you really have to ask yourself, do you understand what it means to go pro? And is that something you want to do? There's absolutely nothing wrong with being a hobbyist, a consumer, a prosumer. In fact, I think, frankly, it is far more fun and far more advantageous today to be a consumer photographer than it is to be a pro. When I pick up a camera to do projects, I only shoot what I want to shoot. I will never, ever do another assignment where someone says to me, hey, we want to hire you to do this, and I look at the concept and I go, good grief. Just get it over with. Yes, I want the money, but this is horrible. I've had to do that many times in my life in many different genres of photography, and I don't ever want to do it again. I absolutely love being a consumer photographer, but I was fortunate. I was not born with a huge ego that identifies with being a photographer. And when I quit photography, I had a lot of friends for several years thereafter that kept introducing me as a photographer. And I would say, look, I'm not. I haven't been a photographer in years. I don't identify with it. It's not important to me, but it was important to them. It's a very strange psychological thing. Being a professional photographer sounds sexy, and in some ways it is. I've been a hot tub installer. That really sucks. I was a fragrance model for a couple of days. That sucks even more than installing hot tubs, believe it or not. Neither of those good career paths. Trust me, I walked that road for you. You can take my advice. You don't want to do either one of those things. Photography, yeah, hell of a lot better than those, but it's not as sexy as you think it is, because when you get into the reality and the nitty-gritty of the behind the scenes, it can be very challenging and very ugly. And I want to speak to some of that. Why would you want to go pro? Again, this is point one. But two, prove me wrong. If you want to go pro and you think this is something you want to do, then you have to take people like me and tell me to F off. You have to politely tell me to F off. You would never tell me that to my face or tell that to a crowd of people behind the scenes, but internally, you have to take what I'm saying and say, that doesn't apply to me. I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to go out there. I will give you one example before we move to point two. When Rick and I started AG23, the first person I introduced Rick to, and Rick is the director of Beyond and was not in the photography industry. The first photographer I introduced him to, who I thought would be a wonderful addition to AG23, accused both of us of ripping him off and stealing from him, and went on a rant about billionaires and millionaires and all of these different things. It was one of the most hypocritical rants I've ever experienced in photography. He was personally trying to insult us. He was personally accusing us. It was ego, it was insecurity, it was hypocrisy. It was all rolled into one. Now, we could have gone in one of two directions. We could have said to each other when we got back to the car, well, gee, that sucked. That was a kick in the teeth. I guess this project's a bad idea. We should move along, do something else. Clearly, we were off base here. But the two of us looked at each other and we kind of went, okay, that's one person's take. Friday of last week, I walked into an opening in Santa Fe, New Mexico at a very highly respected gallery and looked at the work on the walls of a photographer who was having their work exhibited, who is a contributor in the second issue of the zine. And as I was looking at this work on the walls and saying to myself, this is very cool, someone else walked in the gallery who was also a contributor to the second issue of AG23, who said, I'm so excited. This has been so beneficial for me to be in the zine, and here's why, and broke down this incredible financial success that was directly related to her being in the zine. And as she's talking to me, a third person walks up who's going to be a contributor in the third issue of AG and says, I'm so stoked, I'm so excited, when can we get started on this? And I kind of said to myself, yeah, if I would have taken the advice of the initial photographer who was a royal jerk to both of us, and we could have easily said, look, this sounds terrible, maybe the response is not going to be good, but we knew that that was an outlier. We knew that that opinion was a minority and that what we were trying to do would be beneficial to the people we were publishing. So we quietly said, F you to the rest of society, the rest of the global photo apparatus, and we did it anyway. So prove me wrong. Point number two, I'm going to break this, and I've made some really cryptic notes here, people. I can barely understand them. This was done sloppily like everything else I do. So I want to break this into two divisions, and I've spoken about this many times in the past, about the two sides of photography. One is not better than the other. They are totally different. And at the very end of this, the last point, number 10, I'm going to tell you what I would do were I to go back and try to be a photographer with what I know now from being away from photography for 10 years and not having a dog in the hunt. I can be honest about this because I don't have repercussions. I'm not worried about a photo editor or an agency director. I could care less about those people now. I would have an attack plan that I will share with you what I would do. But we're going to break photography, professional photography, into two divisions. The online photography world, which is I'm just going to primarily say social media and YouTube. I'm going to put YouTube in its own category. And then the traditional brick and mortar industry. Yeah, let me see my notes here. Social, IG, YouTube. Yeah, online is primarily dominated right now by Instagram. There's a little bit of Facebook, a little bit of Twitter, and then YouTube. Traditional is this. Photojournalism. This is the actual industry. These are the outlets, the institutions, the collections. Photojournalism, editorial, which stands for magazine work, commercial, advertising, fashion, stock, automotive, fine art. That is the traditional the genres of traditional brick and mortar photography. Agencies, editors, art buyers, assignments, contracts, licensing of imagery. It's a whole separate mechanism. And if you don't know anything about it because you came up in photography on Instagram and YouTube, that's totally fine. That's actually a great thing because you are about to have the veil pulled back on what the real industry of photography is and what it has to offer, which is off the charts. Okay, let's see here. I forgot to mention, on the actual brick and mortar side of things, you also have the portrait and wedding world. Now, those have historically, professionally been split between professional commercial, which covers all of the first things I listed, photojournalism, editorial, commercial, advertising, fashion, stock, automotive, fine art. That is considered professional commercial. Then you have professional portrait wedding. It's its own world. For decades, they were called portrait weenies, right? And the portraits world had trade shows where they would award each other medals and people would all wear these medals around their chest. And it was very kind of dorky and awkward, incredibly nice people and incredibly successful people. And that's the part that drove me crazy. When I worked for Kodak Professional, I worked in the commercial side, but I also had dealings and happenings with the portrait wedding side. And the commercial side would always look down on the portrait wedding side, and I would look at it and say, man, those people are far more, as a collective, far more successful financially than the commercial side. It's just not sexy shooting portraits and weddings. No matter what anyone says, that ain't sexy work. So it always got a bad rap, and that's wrong. It's actually inaccurate. That world is very organized, very successful, and that is one area of professional commercial brick and mortar industry where I do see a sort of an easy way of getting a leg in to make money. I'm not saying it's the photography is easy, that running a business, but there are far less gatekeepers on the portrait wedding side than there are on the commercial side. The commercial side of photography is all about gatekeeping. It's about playing the game to get accepted by people who control what's happening. And that can rub some people the wrong way. If you came up in the digital side of photography, the online side, and you start to try to engage with the traditional brick and mortar side, you can be like, whoa, wait a second, these people are telling me I'm not that great. They're trying to tell me how much I'm worth. It's a different sort of field that you have to learn to navigate. Whereas in online, there's virtually no barrier to entry whatsoever. The online world of photography is based on metrics. It's based on numbers and metrics. And I know that rubs some people the wrong way. It's not sexy. You don't want to believe that's actually happening. I am sitting here telling you it is. And I've had that conversation with numerous photographers over the past 6 weeks who I reached out to and said, am I crazy? Or are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? Are you hearing the same thing? And they said, yes, it's one of our biggest aggravations is when you're talking about online photography, namely Instagram and YouTube. It is often about, it's not often, in my experience in the last few years in particular, it's 100% about numbers and metrics. The metrics of the user, the metrics of their following, geographically where they're located, what is their socioeconomic income, what is their racial demographic, all of that plays in. There is never a conversation about the quality of photography. It is about numbers. And I know that's not sexy and it dings some egos out there, but that's what's happening and you better get used to it. Now, there is a way of spinning this, and I will get to this at the end. I don't look at that as a particularly bad thing. I look at that as, Gordon Gekko, you want a friend, buy a dog. We're in business. This is about money. It's about revenue. It's about money, 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 money. The aesthetic side of photography can take a hike because money is going to outweigh that every single time, no matter what. And that goes to the highest reaches of fine art, down to the lowest common denominator on Instagram, micro influencers who are asking for big money, and brands don't know what else to do, and they're paying it because they're desperate and kind of clueless as to what to do without social. So, all right, let me see here. I have a little subcategory breakdown here of fine art for no apparent reason. And then another group I completely neglected to mention when it comes to the traditional brick and mortar industry. So underneath fine art, you have gallerists, museums, curators, collectors, and public art. And so that's a whole subcategory of fine art alone. I could easily do a film. And look, let me be right up front about this. I am not a fine art photographer. I find that aspect and that genre of photography to be simultaneously the most appealing genre of photography left, and also the most ridiculous, fickle, discriminatory, awful group of people I've ever encountered in photography. It's true. It's a balance. You have to learn to navigate it. It's a game. And the conversations I've had that I cannot share with you because they're private, with people who operate in that space, about the ridiculousness, the fickleness, the discrimination, all of that stuff that happens, it's astounding that anyone would still play in that world, but they do because the reward is still high. It's one of the highest rewards out there if you can solve the riddle. Okay, the last group that I forgot to mention, which again has been somewhat discriminated against for a long, long time, and it makes no sense because, again, this group is incredibly successful. They are getting often many of the book deals, the gallery shows, the institutional shows, the collections, the public art, and that is photographic education at a high level. This is art schools like Art Center in Pasadena, you've got RISD, you've got Savannah College of Art and Design, you've got Parsons, you've got ICP in New York, you've got School of Visual Arts, and schools all over the world that are also representative of schools like that, but just whatever country you're talking about. Art education, photo education, that's a whole separate category of people who got degrees in art and photography and said, I don't want to work as a commercial photographer, I want to be an educator so that when I'm doing projects, I can control 100% of what I'm doing, and I want to do books and galleries and museums and that kind of thing. If you want to know about that world, then you want to go to SPE, which is Society of Photographic Education. They have an annual event. It is fantastic. It is eye-opening. And here's the crazy part. The commercial photography world, the macho, insecure, egotistical, hypocritical commercial world of fashion, editorial, commercial, advertising, PJ, all that stuff, historically has always looked down on the education market, as we've all heard the bad cliche. Oh, if you can do, and if you can't, teach. That is complete horseshit, because the best work that you're going to see most of the time, in my experience, the first time I went to SPE, I was blown away of how good the work was, how many book deals I saw, how many exhibitions, how many public art installations. And I was like, why is the commercial world making fun of this world? They're kicking their ass. So that SPE in itself is a gold mine. If you just take one thing from this call, okay, I'll call it a call. I can do whatever the heck I want. If you take one thing, SPE, not bad, right? That's an organization that you can spend the next 6 months diving into. Who's teaching, who's doing what, and that is brick and mortar industry. Not to say that all of these commercial people, all of the traditional industry people have online arms. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. Some YouTube, not many, because they don't have much time because they're working, they're doing shoots, they're not doing YouTube. YouTube is too time intensive, I think, for most of these folks. They all have a digital arm. Often behind the scenes, they talk about how stupid it is, how fickle it is, ridiculous, phony, but in public, the facade is, oh, yep, this is me. I'm only going to use Instagram for one thing, to show my portfolio. And behind the scenes, they're down the rabbit hole, hiding in bathroom stalls, checking their feed. They're addicted to the same things that the online crowd is. To me, it's a temporary blight on the history of photography. I think we will look back on this time and say, what the heck were we thinking? In the past week, you have Instagram talking about no longer being a still photography platform, and they're going to do, it's about motion, and photographers are up in arms and they're going to Twitter. That is the most hypocritical bunch of crap I've ever heard. And I'm going to say F off to those people who are doing that. Let me get this straight. The indiscretion that we know about these platforms and Facebook going back over a decade. Yesterday, there was another story about Facebook allowing the right wing to post under the Green Party, and now they're being investigated again. All of the indiscretions of Facebook and Instagram to photographers, that was totally fine. Oh, that's totally fine. Ripping our country and fabric of our country apart with misinformation and organized, understood, specific, weaponized delivery of misinformation. Oh, that's fine. But oh, switching from stills to motion, now I'm offended and I'm going to go to Twitter. That is so insulting and speaks to the current state of the photo industry better than anything I could tell you. It's embarrassing. So my advice is stop. If you're whining about this, delete these networks already and move on with your life. Life on the outside is far better, far richer than it is in the phony world online. Point number 3. This is not easy. Whether you are an online superstar and you have a YouTube channel with 1 million views, those guys, those people who are doing that, male, female, tech people, photography people, cinematic filmmakers, that is not easy. They did not luck into that success. Being a successful online YouTuber is an insane amount of work. If you're going to be on Instagram and feed your whole life into Instagram, that's not easy. The algorithm is sucking more and more and more of you out in return for less and less and less. And it's not easy. So I think I see a lot of people making snide comments about YouTubers who have success or Instagrammers who have success and saying, oh, that must have just landed in their lap. It's not. They got on early. They knew what they were doing. They looked at what was popular. They knew how to build a following. They're after numbers and metrics. They're not after necessarily making unique or interesting work because that may not get the numbers. So if you're going into the online world thinking it's going to be super easy, it's not. The traditional world, however, is harder because gatekeepers, history, tradition, power, influence. It's ridiculous. When I started my photographic career, I lived in Southern California. I had no computer and no mobile phone. I had a landline telephone and the US Postal Service. That was my career. My career was in the hands of about 6 people that I had never met who lived in Manhattan. And that sucked. I had no control, no power. But in 1995, I said to myself, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not letting these people dictate who I am, how I work, where I go. I will start to take control. And I started that through publishing my own work, making small magazines, making small run art books, and saying no to people who clearly had my best intentions not at heart. And so the traditional industry is tricky because you cannot just show up because someone's going to look at your work and say, you're not very good. They might even say you suck, or they might even say you're wasting my time. When I came up in photography, being insulted like that was every single day. People would do verbal abuse was front and center, sometimes physical abuse. That was just part of it, but I think that's more representation of our culture and society in general at that time. It was prior to every kid getting a trophy kind of thing. That's all changed. So this is not easy. You have to understand that you're probably going to have to work harder than you ever imagined to pull this off. Now, I do know people who are trustafarians whose families have money. I know documentary photographers who are sitting on a lot of money who sort of you would never, ever, ever know that if you met them. They would never speak about it publicly. They're sort of living the facade of being the gritty photojournalist or the gritty editorial person, but behind the scenes, they're sitting on a lot of wealth. But those people are minuscule in number. The rest of the people are grinding it out. So the days, I would say late 90s, early 2000s, I knew a lot of photographers who were doing really well, pretty much across the board. News photographers, newspapers were still going. You had amazing staffs. They were spending money. They were traveling, doing stories. The editorial world was booming. Commercial advertising, stock hadn't been decimated. The early 2000s was sort of the honeymoon started to crumble and go away. And since that time, it has gotten much higher. Stock has been destroyed. The newspapers are gone for the most part in terms of compared to what they were at that time. Editorial is really paying the same rates they've paid since the 1970s. It's embarrassing, and commercial and advertising is in real trouble, although there are still people doing really well. And that's when I flip back here to my point at the beginning, was the underlying theme of this is that there are people doing well, and there is a positive aspect of this business that still lives, and it's about making great work and tapping into that and understanding that 90% of what you're going to do is business and not about photography. All right, point number 4. I mentioned this before, but it's worth going over again. The traditional paths are gone. So when I started, the path was this. I got a degree in photojournalism, and after you got a degree, you applied for internships at newspapers. The newspaper was the best training ground you could have ever asked for. You got an internship, maybe you got 2 internships, 3. There were half a dozen papers around the country that were known as the prime locations for internships, and if you were lucky, you could get one of those. I didn't. I got a paper that actually turned out to be wonderful, but it was not ranked in the top, 10 internship kind of things. Then the goal was to do well during an internship, which would then impress the staff and the executives who might make a space for you, and you would get a staff job. The staff job came with a salary, with benefits, oftentimes with a company vehicle, because as a journalist, you're really putting a beating on your car. And then the goal was to work for 5, 6, 7 years at the paper, learn the trade, learn to work under pressure, and then make a jump into the editorial world, the magazine world, which was much sexier. And then you would be freelancing in magazines. And then the best case scenario was to get a contract or staff job at a magazine. Again, staff job came with a salary or a guaranteed number of days each year. And then benefits, all that. That was starting to crumble even as I was coming up. That was going away. The contracts were being dropped. Staff jobs at magazines were almost impossible. That's the limo to lunch crowd. The execs here in New York taking a limo back and forth to go to the Four Seasons to eat lunch while they're underpaying their staff. That's still happening to some degree with certain magazines. It sucks, but that's the truth. But all of those paths are gone. But remember, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have the internet. I didn't have a computer. And all of a sudden the internet comes along, and I'm saying to myself, this is great. I don't have to rely on these other people anymore. I can go direct. So in 2002, I started a website called Smog Ranch. Everyone I knew in photography said, don't do it, because they didn't know what it was. In 2002, people were like, what's a blog? And I'm like, look, I can go direct. I can take my work, put it online, and if people are interested, it's a global thing. I can build an audience of people, which I did. I still get people saying to me, oh, don't do a website, don't do a website, don't do a website. They're clueless, they're insecure, they're putting their hands and their career in the hands of other people, which is just ridiculous. And I'll get back to that, because I just had a conversation with someone who said to me, what you say about photography is so refreshing to hear because you're saying it in public. And she said, no, everybody talks about this, but everyone's afraid to say it in public. And I said, I don't have a dog in the hunt. I don't care. No repercussions. I will tell you exactly what I see and hear from this industry. So point number 4 was traditional channels are gone. Point number 5, the traditional industry photographers are demanding, and they are more difficult to work with. And that is changing because clients don't want to fight with these people anymore. If you go to art school, if you have success as a photographer, and all of a sudden you're working with 20-year-olds who are art directors or working for agencies who don't have any experience in the industry, they don't know who you are, they don't know the legacy, the context, they don't know the history, they don't know how the pieces work together, but yet they're assigning people from these agencies, it can be really frustrating. And traditional photographers are much more difficult to work with than online. Online photographers seem to be far more adaptive, far more upbeat, and also their definition of success is often very, very low in comparison to a traditional brick and mortar photographer industry person who is looking for, I need a huge creative fee. I need my production crew. We're going to license these images. The agency's going to take the images afterwards. They're going to be relicensed all over. You've got a lot of people involved, a lot of industry involved, a lot of history involved, a lot of money, a lot of contracts. And online folks are like, I don't have a contract, and I'm, yes, the brand is gonna pay me a little money to do a static post or a motion post on Instagram, and that's considered success. But I think the traditional photogs, you better wise up, because brands they don't want to put up with your attitude, your ego, and that kind of stuff. And again, there's a ton of great photographers working in photography who are not egotistical, who are not difficult to work with. There are some gems of people who are working as photographers who are very smart, very well-rounded people who've been doing this for a long time, who have success, that everyone around them goes, wow, this person is a gem. The ones who are prickly are the ones who are going to be in trouble, because the folks coming up who are pulling the strings in photography just don't want to deal with it. I wouldn't either. Okay, point number 6, the traditional industry is being usurped by the online industry. Wow, my mom has called me like 8 times in a row. My mom's not having, she's having some health issues, and it's directly related to her short-term memory, and it's sad. It's a bummer. My mom was a powerhouse. Her nickname was Annie Oakley, and she was a total badass. Even in Wyoming as a kid, when we got involved in the ranching world, my mom was top dog, man. She was alpha. All the cowboys, everyone else was like, whoop, I'm not messing with your mom. So it's a bit unfortunate. We got to really take care of her. Traditional is being usurped by the online but it has nothing to do with the quality of the work. So let me repeat this. The traditional industry players are slowly being eroded by the online players, but it's only because clients don't know what else to do. I've never seen so many clients lost in terms of who they are, what their visual statement is, who they're trying to be, what their messaging is, what makes them unique, who's going out on a limb and trying an advertising campaign or a commercial campaign that's different, that's outside the norm, that's not Instagram influencers, micro influencers. Oy, that makes my head hurt. That's why online is taking over from trad, because the clients don't know what else to do. They feel like they're trapped in this ecosystem of social being the driving force. All the while they're saying, yeah, this stuff's not very good, but like, what else do we do? So that is going to continue, in my opinion, at least for the foreseeable future. At some point, there will be a reckoning. I don't know what that reckoning is. Does it mean that the traditional industry goes away? Or does it mean that the wave breaks and rolls back and people say, okay, let's just put this online thing in perspective. Let's continue to utilize it, but let's get back to like thinking about quality of work instead of metrics. I'm not holding my breath, but maybe that happens. Okay, point number 7 is you will hear this term a lot, especially in the online community. And it's used in a peculiar way, in my opinion. And the term is the hustle. Oh, gotta do the hustle. I'm really doing the hustle. Now, that will be tossed out there. I've seen this in the past week. I've seen a YouTuber talking about this, and he's pained. You can see behind the scenes how unhappy this chap is. And that sucks, because he's probably a good human being and he's probably a good photographer, but the hustle erodes everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. I had a conversation a few months ago with one of the single best photographers working on the planet Earth right now. He didn't use that term, but it was understood in the conversation that that's what we were referring to, and it's not easy, even for someone like that. So an online YouTuber who's not getting the same financial return, that's potentially putting in even more work, and that hustle is bad. I saw another person, an editorial photographer, who had described the hustle as following up with clients trying to get paid, because 30 days goes by, 60, 90, 120, and clients aren't paying. You've got to send a second invoice that has a 15% ding price saying, look, you guys missed your payment deadline, you got to pay more. People are apprehensive about doing that. Clients know that they have power and control. There are some legendary stories about editorial outlets ripping off photographers and not paying them. This has been happening for a long time, and that hustle is what eventually can wear you down and turn something you love, photography, into something you don't like, something, I was going to say hate, but that's too strong a word, something that you lose sight of. That happened to me twice in my career. I quit the first time in '97. I should have stayed quit. I didn't. I came back, and by 2010, I think it was, when I quit for realsy, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Love photography, gonna keep doing it, ain't gonna do it for anyone else because I don't want to fight that fight. The fight can also be used as the hustle. Know that that is a part of your career that you're gonna have to deal with. In the traditional brick and mortar industry, you've got successful photographers who have multiple assistants, retouchers, tech people, production crews. They have a network and system agents, a system in place around them that helps buffer some of that. If you've got an agent who is getting the jobs for you and working with your licensing, that takes some of the pressure off. You've got a digital tech when you're on the set, meaning you're not the one having to do all the manipulations and work with the files. You've got assistants that are helping you set things up. That gives you more time with the client, that you can actually sit and talk to them, explain what you're doing, build a relationship with them. Those are all things that work to help the hustle, to help buffer the hustle, but it's still there and you have to know that. Number 8, I think I can read my own writing. The only person who can make you is you. Ultimately, you are the person that holds the cards. You will find yourself having a dialogue, dual dialogues, maybe sometimes 3 dialogues. Dialogue in your head with yourself about the person you actually are, the person you want to be, and the gap between those. Then you will have your online conversation, which nowadays for pretty much everyone is at least a little bit phony. And then you will have your business dialogue. You have to wear those hats. You've got to be you, you've got to be your persona, and you've got to be a business person. Give you an example. A friend of mine is an agent, very high level agent, industry person, has been around for a long time. We never worked together professionally. We were just buds. She would come over, hang out, we would talk. I would see her at events. I've known her for years. She comes over one day and I've got a body of work laying out on a light table and she starts looking at it. And now she and I, when we were together, never talked about my work. It was always about industry stuff. So she's looping this stuff on the light table and she goes, you know, you're actually a really good photographer. And I was like, oh, you know, thanks. And I said something about the work in front of her, about like a show or whatever. And she goes, no, we are not friends right now. You put on your business hat and we will talk business. And when the business is over, you take the business hat off and we go back to being friends. But we're not those two things at the same time. And that stuck with me because it was 100% accurate. Because otherwise it gets muddied and you make bad decisions. Clients are not evil. The industry is not evil. They are in business. They want to make as much money as humanly possible by outputting the least amount possible. And as a business person, as a photographer, you have to be able to navigate that minefield, which is aesthetics versus business versus friend versus foe. And it's tricky and it's complicated. That's why people have agents. They have agencies that are buffers between those two things in part. So the only person who can save you is you. Think about that. Okay, number 9. This in itself, I told you before about a Society of Photographic Education. Well, I'm going to give you another little hint here that is probably going to occupy the next 6 months of your life. If you came up on Instagram and YouTube, you might not be aware of any of this. And I'm going to give you a little prize, a little present right now, which is called the Palm Springs Photo Festival. Yes, the Palm Springs Photo Festival, also called Connect. This has been running for 15 years approximately. The founder is a very cool, very eccentric, very unique dude that has a history in photography that is unlike anyone else I've ever met. He's a master analog photographer, printer, darkroom guy, and a master digital guy. That's very rare. He has an incredible photo book collection. He is one of the most incredible brains about the history of photography that I've ever met in my life. It's intimidating. I'll show Jeff a print and thinking it's a master finished print, and 20 minutes later he'll be like explaining to me why this is nothing more than a work print. And I don't even know what he's talking about. He's the founder, the guy that puts all this together. The reason that Palm Springs Photo Festival is the way it is because of him. He has a relationship with the best photographers in the world and can get them not only to travel to a place like Palm Springs, he can get them to share. They teach workshops, they give talks, they're on panels, they're in symposiums. It's unlike any other event in photography in the United States by a long shot. There is nothing remotely like this. The reason I'm telling you about this, and the past 2 years of the festival have been digital, obviously because of COVID. At some point, let's hope they get back to a physical physical festival that you can attend. The reason I'm telling you this is I want you to do something, especially if you're from the online world. I want you to go to the Palm Springs Photo Festival website, and I want you to look at the faculty. I'm going to do it right now. I should have had this loaded up, but I don't. Palm Springs. Come on, baby. Can't type. Springs Photo Festival. Did I get lucky? I misspelled every single one of those words, but at least I was consistent. Will they send me someplace special? Please tell me you know what movie that's from. You can't park your car here. Sir, we're not parking it. We're abandoning it. Come on. My internet sucks. I don't have internet here. Did I mention that? Okay. Home, complete information. Whoa. Free links. No, that's not what I want. Damn it. Okay. What I was looking for, which I can't seem to find here, complete information. Yeah. Okay. Not a big surprise. Maybe this helps. Their site, the links are not working on the site, but don't hold that against them. I'm going to go to home, try to start this over. And try menu from the home page, complete information. Nope, it disappears. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the list of faculty that has been at the Palm Springs Photo Festival. You're going to look at faculty, and you are going to look at the people who are reviewing portfolios. The faculty alone will keep you busy for a year. These are the best people working in all of the genres that I mentioned before. PJ, editorial, commercial, fine art, fashion, every landscape, conflict, they have the best people. Look at who the faculty is individually, go to their websites and look and read as to who they are and what they're doing. That is a window into the traditional brick and mortar photography world. There is no more concise tip of the spear list of people. Then go to the list of people who are coming in to review portfolios. You're going to see editors, you're going to see art buyers, you're going to see curators, you're going to see people that are collectors, you're going to see people from all over the world who have flown in to look and value photography. Those people are going to keep you busy for another year. You're going to learn about things like Visa pour l'Image. You're going to learn about things like Perry Photo. You're going to learn about things like Head On in Australia, Contact in Toronto, all the big photo festivals, the big events, and the superstars who are working in that industry. It is an eye-opener. Now remember, all of those people, for the most part, are going to have a digital arm. They're going to have an online arm. But the online arm doesn't erode the work that they're making. They are not looking at YouTube and saying, gee, if I do unboxing films, I'll increase my viewership. No, they're looking at unboxing films saying, you've got to be a zombie. You're already dead if you're watching unboxing films. Why would I do that? Is there a way to use YouTube to highlight what I'm doing as a photographer or building a base for the work that I'm doing? Yes, but they're not selling out in the online world. It's a different kind of scale. I will say this, that traditional world has a lot to learn, and they can learn a lot from the online photo community. The online photo community, again, is not lesser than the traditional brick and mortar world. It is completely different. It's a different language, and you have to learn how to speak it. And everyone right now is in language class on both sides of the scale. The online world and the trad world, most of the time, all of us, we're in language school. We're in Antigua, Guatemala for 5 days a week, 3 hours in the morning, sitting saying, yo quiero leche y queso. We're trying to understand how to speak the other languages, and that is going to continue. It's going to continue to evolve. Okay, last point before I run out of oxygen and you guys all fall asleep. What would I do? Thank you for asking. How polite. I can't believe it. I've been rambling now just to get to the point to tell you what I would do because my ego is the size of, no, I'm just kidding. I don't think I have an ego. If I do, tell me. Because I would own up to it and say, maybe you're right, I do have an ego. I don't really care. Here's what I would do. If I was starting now, I would sure as hell start in the online world. I would. And there's probably some of you out there who are like, what? Come on, what is this, the gulag? I would start in the online world. I like the online world. Yes, it's ridiculous. Makes no sense like 90% of the time. It's embarrassing. But I get it. It's about popularity, right? It's a popularity contest. Cinematic filmmakers talking about what menu settings to use and what gimbal to get a cinematic look for a, quote, travel film that probably isn't for anyone other than them, but they claim that they're on a travel assignment because it looks cool, and then no one really knows what's behind the scenes or where the money came from, and there's more questions than answers, and you're like, who are these people and why do all these films look the same? Yes, that is a part of it. Photographers who never show their work because they don't know how to shoot. Amazing at building a following. Amazing cinematic. Their transitions are incredible. They're shooting at 8K. They're doing all this stuff, but they never show work because they don't have any work that's worth showing. I get that. Yes. But it still takes skill to do that. It does. And here's the cool thing about the online world, in my opinion. The online world, more than anything else, because once you start to unlock the riddle and you start to build a sizable numeric following, whether they're bots or not, no one seems to care, it gives you bargaining power. It gives you positioning power. I would never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, put my career in the hands of the people in the brick and mortar industry. Not anymore. I wouldn't do it. It's too fickle. I hear stories every month of just insane craziness, awfulness behind the scenes. There was an article 2 days ago about the New York Times photo editor international edition that was let go after a lengthy investigation. Read that article and tell me that is just, it's not sad 7 ways over. I would use the online world to create the kind of work I want, to build an audience that is dedicated to what I'm doing as a photographer. Then I would reach out and I would engage with the pieces of the brick and mortar industry that make sense to me. And then when I got involved in those negotiations, because I'm the one that has the power behind the following and the numbers, they cannot dictate to me nonsensical rules about how they're going to operate. They don't dictate and say, well, and what client doesn't say, oh, we don't have much of a budget on this one. They're in business. Of course they're going to say that. And you say, well, guess you're not working with me. You give them the polite F you, right? I've mentioned this many times before. You don't want to be a jerk. You don't want to say F you. But you say, you know what? That's not working for me. It's too bad we couldn't make this work. Maybe we'll try something next time. Boom, you walk away. You have the bargaining and positioning power. You will run into people who say that's impossible. It's not. I see it happening every day. I see it happening through Instagram. I see it happening through YouTube. I see it happening through Facebook. Sometimes it makes my skin crawl. And other times I'm like, super smart. That was a good negotiation tool. Because, like I said, you're the only one who can save you. If it was up to me, I would live in both worlds. Because the vast majority of good, signature, memorable work is not coming from the online world. It's coming from brick and mortar. But it is a minefield. You have to learn to navigate. You've got to take your bayonet, you've got to stick the ground in front of you and make sure you're not stepping on a claymore. Once you figure out how to do that, you've got a solid online audience. You're able to produce decent work consistently so that clients in brick and mortar can say, look, yeah, he did a great project, but how do we know he can do it again? You've produced consistent results over time. That way, when you turn towards brick and mortar, you hold the cards. You have the power and control. And that's any business is about power and control. In photography, it's about aesthetic. You've got to make good and interesting work. We didn't even talk about that, but that often gets overshadowed because people see what's popular and they just go copy it. That's a short-term play. It's never going to work in the long run. You're never going to have a career. It's making good work is not easy. It's incredibly difficult, even for people who are talented. They're still batting maybe 300 if they're lucky, and that's something you got to get used to and get over. Well, I think that was a long and rambling mess. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, so that was a long-winded thing. I think this is going to be a consistent series because this changes and evolves. And for me, not having a dog in the hunt, it's very interesting. People confess to me. People ask me questions. People have seen what I've done on YouTube, and I've got, I don't know how many subscribers now, but it's more than 1,000. And people are like, man, you're doing really well. And I'm like, no, not really. I don't think it means anything. And I don't think it's a long-term thing for me. And I think the people who are successful on YouTube have like millions of subscribers. And is that something I'm ever going to take the time and like focus to do? Are there a million people in the world who want to hear what I just said? Doubtful. Am I going to change my life and act like some other guy so that I can try to entice another 999,000 people? No, I don't have time. I'm not that good. I can't fake it. I can't fake it till I make it, because in some ways, I don't think I ever made it. And so you got to be realistic, people. But I thank you for tuning in. I hope that was remotely helpful. I'm going to go back to charging every device that I have, which is considerable. I've got two 20,000 milliamp battery packs. I've got a 1,000-watt solar generator. And I'm worried about running out of power, people. So more power, Captain. I'll be back.